In 1866, a Texas cattleman named Charles Goodnight bolted a wooden box onto an old army wagon and accidentally built the most important kitchen in the American West. But here's what Hollywood never tells you. The sizzling steak dinners, the crowded saloon feasts, the whiskey flowing like a river, almost none of it was real. Number 4 on this list was guarded so fiercely that a cook would sleep beside it with a loaded shotgun. And number 1 is the food cowboys almost never ate, even while they were surrounded by thousands of pounds of it. What real cowboys actually put in their bellies would stun every director who ever pointed a camera at the frontier. Before we ride out, hit that subscribe button, because the truth about the American cowboy starts with his stomach. Let's count down 25 things Western movies got completely wrong. Number 25. In nearly every Western, someone tears a hunk from a golden loaf of bread. It's a small lie, but it's a lie. Out on the trail, a soft bakery loaf was pure fantasy. There were no ovens, no bakeries, and no time. What the cowboy ate instead was the biscuit, heavy, dense, and baked in a cast-iron Dutch oven buried in coals. The cook would mix flour, salt, and lard right on the wagon's fold-down work table, cut the dough with the mouth of a tin can, and drop the rounds into the pot before shoveling hot embers onto the lid. In 20 minutes, browned biscuits emerged, tough enough to survive a saddlebag for days. A man might eat 6 at a sitting, sopping up bacon grease. That loaf you see the outlaw slicing, it never made it past the frontier town's front door. Number 24. Movie cowboys sit down to plates piled with greens, corn, and roasted vegetables as if the prairie were one big farmer's market. The reality was closer to a total absence of anything fresh. On a months-long cattle drive, fresh vegetables simply did not exist. They spoiled in days, and there was no room in the wagon for anything that wouldn't keep. The result was a diet so short on greens that cooks quietly worried about their men's teeth loosening in their gums. Onions were the one exception, prized because they lasted and could be tossed into almost anything. A cowboy might go 2 or 3 months without tasting a single fresh vegetable, living on beans, bread, and meat. When a drive finally reached a town, grown men were known to buy pickles and onions by the handful, craving anything crisp and sharp after the long gray monotony of the trail. Number 23. Long before the biscuit could be baked fresh, there was hardtack, and Hollywood pretends it never existed. This was a flat, rock-hard cracker of flour and water, baked until it was nearly indestructible, and it filled saddlebags across the West. Soldiers called it tooth dullers and sheet iron crackers, and the nicknames were earned. A fresh piece could crack a molar. An old one had to be soaked in coffee or stew just to become chewable. But hardtack had one unbeatable virtue. It lasted for years without spoiling, which made it perfect for men who might not see a store for months. Cowboys crumbled it into soups, fried it in bacon grease, and gnawed it in the saddle when there was no time to stop. It wasn't a meal anyone loved. It was survival in a square. And no cowboy movie has ever dared to show a hero nearly break a tooth on his lunch. Number 22. In the movies, salt is an afterthought, a shaker on a saloon table. On the real frontier, salt was closer to currency. Without refrigeration, it was the only thing standing between a side of pork and rot, and every barrel of preserved meat depended on it. Cowboys packed salt in tins and guarded it like coin, because a supply running low could mean the whole camp's meat spoiling in the heat. It cured the bacon, seasoned the beans, and drew moisture out of drying beef strips so they'd keep for weeks. In the arid Southwest, salt licks and salt springs became landmarks, worth a detour of many miles. A cook who ran out was in real trouble, facing a mutiny of hungry, bland-fed men. That little shaker the movies love, the real thing was a heavy, precious sack the cook counted like gold before every drive. Number 21. When the flour ran low, and it always did, the cowboy turned to corn. Cornmeal was cheaper than wheat flour, kept better in the heat, and stretched further, which made it a backbone of the trail diet the movies almost never show. The cook would fry up flat cornmeal cakes in bacon grease or boil the meal into a thick mush eaten straight from the tin plate. In a Dutch oven, cornmeal, water, and a little fat became a crumbly cornbread that soaked up bean broth beautifully. Down along the Mexican border, that same corn became tortillas, cooked on a hot iron and rolled around whatever the pot offered. It was plain food, sometimes gritty, often scorched, but corn was reliable, and reliability was everything 1,000 miles from the nearest store. No saloon scene ever featured a plate of fried mush, yet that mush fed more cowboys than any steak. Number 20. Sugar is everywhere in the Western imagination, dusting pies and sweetening saloon coffee. But refined white sugar was expensive and hard to haul, so the real sweetener of the range was molasses, thick, dark, and poured from a tin. Cowboys called it lick, and it did the work of sugar across the whole camp. It sweetened coffee, glazed biscuits, and turned plain cornbread into something a tired man looked forward to. Sorghum syrup, pressed from cane and boiled down, filled the same role in the poorer camps. A spoonful of molasses stirred into beans added a deep, smoky sweetness that made the endless brown diet bearable. It was sticky, messy, and drew flies in the summer heat, but it was cheap and it kept. The dainty sugar bowl of the movie kitchen was a townsman's luxury. On the trail, sweetness came dark and slow, straight from the molasses tin. Number 19. Here's a detail no Western ever bothers with. Cowboys were quietly at war with scurvy. Months without fresh produce meant the disease that plagued sailors could creep into a cattle camp too, loosening teeth and sapping strength. The cook's secret weapon was dried fruit, apples, peaches, and prunes, packed in sacks and rehydrated in water over the fire. That dried fruit did more than sweeten the menu. The small amount of vitamin C it carried helped keep the men upright. A good cook made dried apple pie so often that cowboys grew sick of it, grumbling a rhyme about how they never wanted to see another apple. But that same monotonous pie may have kept whole crews from falling ill. Stewed prunes appeared on breakfast plates beside the bacon, another quiet defense. The movies show rugged, glowing health. The truth is that health came from a sack of shriveled fruit nobody wanted to eat. Number 18. The movies love a good campfire steak, but the real trail meat was jerky, and cowboys made it themselves as they rode. When an animal was butchered, the cook sliced the meat into thin strips, rubbed them with salt, and hung them to dry in the sun and wind across the wagon or over a low, smoky fire. In a few days, the strips turned into hard, dark ribbons of protein that would keep for weeks without spoiling. A cowboy could tuck jerky into a shirt pocket and gnaw it in the saddle during the long hours between meals, no fire required. It was tough as a bootlace and tasted mostly of salt, but it traveled anywhere and never went bad. Whole drives leaned on it when the pace was too hard to stop and cook. That perfectly grilled campfire steak is cinema. The real trail meat was something you had to soak before your jaw could win the fight. Number 17. Here's where the fantasy really falls apart. In every Western, a cowboy kneels beside a sparkling stream and drinks his fill from cupped hands. The truth was far grimmer. Across much of the cattle trail, water was scarce, muddy, and often shared with 1,000 thirsty cattle who had walked through it first. Cooks halted in wooden barrels lashed to the wagon, and it was rationed carefully, warm and tasting of the barrel. Men strained brown water through a cloth, let the silt settle, and boiled it into coffee strong enough to hide the flavor. Bad water could sicken an entire crew, and finding a clean spring was cause for real celebration. Some stretches of trail were mapped entirely by the distance between water holes. That Crystal Mountain brook the hero drinks from? For most cowboys, water was a warm, gritty ration you were grateful to get it all. Number 16. Of all the surprises in the Cowboys' larder, canned tomatoes might be the strangest, and no movie ever mentions them. By the 1870s, tinned tomatoes had become one of the most beloved items on the trail. Cowboys ate them cold, straight from the can with a knife, and treasured them for reasons that went beyond flavor. In the dry heat, the juicy, acidic tomatoes quenched a thirst that warm barrel water never could, and their vitamin C quietly fought off sickness. A can of tomatoes was a small luxury a man would ride out of his way for. Cooks stewed them with bread and sugar into a dish called tomato pie, and some cowboys swore the juice could ease the ache of a long, dusty day. When a supply wagon rolled in loaded with tinned tomatoes, the whole crew brightened. Hollywood gives us whiskey. The real morale booster came in a humble tin can. Number 15. Down in Texas, New Mexico, and along the Mexican border, the cowboy diet had a fire that the movies scrub away entirely. Chili peppers, dried, crushed, and stirred into the pot, turned bland beans and stringy beef into something worth waking up for. Mexican vaqueros, the original cowboys who taught the Anglo drovers half of what they knew, brought their chile with them, and it spread up the trails. A handful of dried red chilies could transform a monotonous stew, and cooks guarded their pepper stash almost as closely as their coffee. This was the birthplace of chili, chunks of meat simmered with chilies, and whatever else was on hand, long before it became a chuckwagon competition dish. The bland beige food of the movie Cowboy ignores a whole flavor tradition that flowed north from Mexico. For many real cowboys, the best meals on the trail carried a serious kick. Number 14. When a cook wanted to give his crew a real treat but had no fresh fruit to bake with, he reached for a recipe that sounds impossible: vinegar pie. With no lemons for 1,000 miles, cooks mimicked the tang of citrus using a splash of vinegar mixed with sugar or molasses, flour, and water, then baked in a Dutch oven crust. The result was a sweet-sour custard pie that, against all odds, cowboys loved. It cost almost nothing, used only shelf-stable ingredients, and gave men a taste of dessert after weeks of beans. A skilled cook could turn out a vinegar pie that fooled the tongue into thinking it tasted of lemon. Some added dried fruit or a handful of raisins to dress it up. The movies never show a cowboy asking for seconds of pie. But a good vinegar pie could buy a cook the loyalty of an entire outfit for the rest of the drive. Number 13. Dessert on the trail wasn't always a pie. One of the most beloved sweet dishes had a name only a cowboy could invent: spotted pup. It was simply rice boiled with raisins, sweetened with sugar or molasses, and sometimes a little cinnamon, the dark raisins scattered through the white rice like spots on a dog. Rice kept well, raisins kept well, and together they made a warm, filling pudding that felt like a genuine luxury after a hard day. Cooks served it hot from the Dutch oven, and men who wouldn't admit to a sweet tooth in town scraped their plates clean around the fire. It was cheap, easy, and endlessly welcome. For all the gunfights and saloons the movies serve up, they never show the quiet pleasure of a tired crew passing around a pot of spotted pup under the stars. Yet that simple pudding was one of the happiest sights in camp. Number 12. This one, the movies leave out for obvious reasons. During spring branding, when young male calves were castrated, nothing on the frontier went to waste, including what was removed. The cook collected the parts, peeled them, rolled them in flour and salt, and fried them crisp in hot grease. Cowboys called them prairie oysters or Rocky Mountain oysters, and treated branding day as an unexpected feast. Fresh meat was rare on the range, so these were devoured with genuine enthusiasm, often eaten right there at the branding fire. To an outsider, it sounds shocking. To a cowboy, it was simply good sense and a rare taste of something fried and fresh. The tradition survives to this day at Western festivals across the country. Hollywood gives us clean, tidy cowboys who never dirty their hands. The real cowboy ate every part of the animal and looked forward to the strangest part most of all. Number 11. Ask anyone what a cowboy ate and they'll picture beef. But the true meat of the trail was pork, specifically bacon and salt pork, packed in barrels and hauled by the hundreds of pounds. Salt pork kept for months without spoiling, which made it the reliable protein of every drive. The cook fried it up for breakfast, rendered its grease to cook everything else, and used the fat to flavor the beans that anchored every meal. Cowboys called low-grade bacon "sow belly" and complained about it constantly, yet it appeared at nearly every sitting. That grease was too precious to throw away. It was saved, reused, and stirred into biscuits and cornbread. A barrel of salt pork was often the single most important food supply on the wagon. The sizzling steak of the movies is a fantasy. The real dependable smell of a cattle camp at dawn was frying pork fat. Number 10. When a calf was butchered on the trail, the cook made a dish so notorious it had a name too salty to print in polite company. Most folks cleaned it up to son of a gun stew. It used all the fresh organ meat that couldn't be preserved, the heart, liver, tongue, sweetbreads, and a prized piece of gut called the marrow gut, all simmered together for hours in one pot. Because fresh meat spoiled fast, this stew had to be eaten within a day of the kill, which made it a rare and genuine treat. Cowboys judged a cook by how well he made it. The old saying went that to leave out the marrow gut was to ruin the whole thing. Rich, hearty, and deeply flavored, it was frontier nose-to-tail cooking born of pure necessity. No Western hero ever ordered a bowl, yet a good son-of-a-gun stew was one of the most anticipated meals on the entire drive. Number 9. Few images are more cinematic than the cowboy tossing back whiskey at every turn, but on an actual cattle drive, hard liquor was often flat-out forbidden. Trail bosses banned it, and for good reason. A drunk man handling a spooked herd of longhorns could get someone killed in an instant. Alcohol clouded judgment during river crossings, night watches, and stampedes, the moments when a cowboy's life depended on staying sharp. Many outfits allowed not a single drop from the start of the drive to its end, weeks or months later. The heavy drinking the movies love actually came after the drive, when cowboys hit the cattle towns with their pay and cut loose in a single wild night. On the trail itself, the strongest thing in a cowboy's cup was coffee. Hollywood turned a rare payday blowout into a daily habit. The working cowboy was, most of the time, stone sober. Number 8. If one food deserves to be called the true king of the cowboy diet, it's the humble pinto bean. Beans appeared at nearly every meal, so constant that cowboys gave them nicknames with weary affection, calling them prairie strawberries. The cook set a pot of beans simmering with salt pork and chilies early in the day and let them cook low for hours until soft and rich. Cheap, filling, packed with protein, and able to keep as dry goods almost forever. Beans were the perfect trail food. A single sack could feed a crew for days. Men ate them for breakfast, dinner, and supper, mopping the last of the broth with a biscuit. There's an old cook's warning that you never ever criticize the beans if you wanted to keep your teeth. The movies serve up steak. The reality, meal after endless meal, was a tin plate of beans. Number 7. The Western loves a leisurely meal at a wooden table, elbows down, fork and knife in hand. The real cowboy ate nothing of the sort. His day started long before sunrise, and breakfast was wolfed down in the dark, standing up, tin plate in one hand, before the herd began to move. There were no tables, no chairs, and no lingering. Men squatted on the ground or leaned against a wagon wheel, shoveling beans and biscuits into their mouths while the sky was still black. The cook rang the crew to eat by banging on a pot or a triangle, and any man who dawdled might find the food gone. 3 quick meals a day, all eaten fast and rough, all revolving around the wagon. The candlelit frontier dinner is pure invention. The real cowboy meal was a hurried, standing affair in the cold dark, over almost before it began. Number 6. In the movies, the cook is a comic sidekick, a grumbling old man of no importance. In reality, the cook, called Cookie or Cusi from the Spanish cocinero, was the second most powerful man on the drive, behind only the trail boss. He was often the highest paid hand, earning more than the young cowboys who did the riding. He woke first, hours before dawn, and slept last. He drove the wagon, doctored the sick and injured, cut hair, settled arguments, and even acted as banker and barber. A good cook could make or break the morale of an entire outfit, and a bad one could ruin a drive. Cowboys learned quickly never to cross him because he controlled the one thing every man needed. The bumbling movie cook is an insult to the real thing. The Cusi was a respected, feared, indispensable figure, the heart of the whole outfit. Number 5. If beans were the king of the cowboy diet, coffee was its religion. Cowboys drank it constantly, at every meal and through every night watch, and they liked it strong enough to float a horseshoe. The trail brand was almost always Arbuckle's Ariosa, sold in distinctive packages, its beans coated in a sugar and egg glaze that helped them keep. Each package held a peppermint stick, and the cook would offer it to whichever cowboy was willing to grind the beans. Coffee was boiled, not brewed, grounds and all, in a blackened pot that never seemed to leave the fire. It was thick, bitter, and beloved, the one comfort that never ran out if the cook could help it. A camp without coffee was a camp on the edge of revolt. The movies treat it as a background prop. For the real cowboy, that scalding tin cup of Arbuckles was the fuel that made the whole hard life possible. Number 4, remember the item guarded with a loaded shotgun? Here it is, the sourdough starter. Without commercial yeast, the cook kept a living crock of fermented flour and water, the starter that leavened his biscuits, pancakes, and bread every single day. That bubbling crock was so precious that a cook treated it like a member of the family. On freezing nights, he would take it to bed with him, tucking it under the blankets so the cold wouldn't kill the yeast. Some cooks were said to sleep with a gun beside the starter because losing it meant losing bread for the rest of the drive. It was fed daily, never fully used up, and some starters were kept alive for years, even decades, passed from cook to cook. This is the beating culinary secret of the West that no movie has ever shown. A cowboy's daily bread depended on a jealously guarded jar of living dough. Number 3. Every meal on this list came out of one invention, and it's one the movies show without ever explaining. In 1866, cattleman Charles Goodnight took a sturdy army wagon and built onto its back a tall wooden box fitted with drawers and shelves and a hinged lid that folded down into a work table. He called it the chuckwagon, chuck being slang for food, and it changed the West forever. Suddenly, a mobile kitchen could follow the herd across hundreds of miles, carrying flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, tools, and bedrolls all at once. The cook ran it like a captain runs a ship, and its fold-down table was the social center of the entire camp. Every drive after Goodnight's had one. It was the true home of men who had no other home. Hollywood parks it in the background of a shot. In truth, the chuckwagon was the single most important object on the trail. Number 2, picture the classic scene. A cowboy strides into a saloon and is served a thick, sizzling steak with all the trimmings. It is one of the most repeated images in the genre, and it is almost entirely false. Frontier towns rarely offered the lavish beef dinners the movies imagine. Restaurant food, where it existed, was often expensive, plain, and unreliable, including fried salt pork, beans, bread, and stew. The very same trail, food a cowboy was desperate to escape. Fresh beefsteak was harder to come by than you would think, since local beef was often driven off to distant markets rather than butchered nearby. A cowboy fresh off a drive was more likely to spend his pay on a bath, a shave, a new shirt, and a night of gambling than on a fine steak. The Grand Saloon Feast is Hollywood set dressing. The real Cowboy's town meal was usually more beans, dressed up with a little salt and a lot of hope. Number 1, and the number one thing Western movies got completely wrong, is the most ironic of all: cowboys barely ate beef. Think about it. These men spent months surrounded by thousands of cattle, but every one of those animals was money on the hoof, destined for a buyer at the end of the trail. To slaughter a healthy steer for supper was to eat the profit, and no trail boss would allow it. So the men who drove beef across America lived on beans, bacon, biscuits, and coffee instead. When beef was eaten at all, it was usually a stray, an injured animal, or a calf too weak to keep up, never one of the prime steers being delivered to market. The cowboy, the very symbol of American beef, rarely tasted a good steak on the job. It's the great irony of the Old West. They herded the beef, they protected the beef, but it was almost never their dinner. So the next time a Western serves up steak, whiskey, and a saloon feast, you'll know the truth. The real cowboy lived on beans and biscuits, drank coffee by the gallon, guarded his sourdough like treasure, and almost never ate the beef he risked his life to move. It was a hard, plain, resourceful way to eat, and it built the men who built the West. Which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, and I'll see you on the next ride.